Katherine Brito joining us in Bereave's studio today. Katherine is a grief coach and educator specializing in compassion grief support for widows. She started her company, which is called Grief Embraced with Love, after finding herself on her own grief journey. She got a pretty massive social media following, helping guide people through their own grief journeys while she's on one of her own. Katherine, welcome to Bereave Studios.
Thank you. So nice to meet you, Justin. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. And as a reminder, the goal of this podcast is to build community through shared experiences. Katherine, this is the story of not only what you do for a living, but also your journey. So thank you so much for your generosity and giving us this time and giving us the insight on the past several years for you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
So I love that we got connected. We did through social media, which is always fun, getting to know each other a little bit, and really excited and grateful that you said yes to joining us today. Can you talk a little bit about why you thought it was important to have this conversation today?
Yes. First of all, I love all the interviews I saw on your page of the past guests. I thought they were beautiful questions, like I um, said earlier. And I think it's so important to spread awareness in so many aspects of grief. And there's so many conversations that need to be had. And I think this is a wonderful way to shed light to a lot of the challenges in the grief community, and a lot of ways that those that are not grieving can understand what we're going through and how to best support us.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I think I think those that are not grieving is so key, because even though you talk about a grief community, that community has another community around it that probably isn't or might not be grieving, and those are people that they interact with every single day, and so it becomes this just this group of everyday people that are in your lives that may or may not know about what's going on, and the ability to support each other in those situations is pretty critical to our day to day. Can you talk a little bit, Katherine, about what exactly you do and who you do it for?
Yes, so I am a grief coach and educator and a self love coach as well. And my goal is to guide not just widows, mainly widows, but partner loss, anyone going through partner loss as well, guide them through and support them through their grief journey, processing the loss, integrating it into their day to day lives, and ultimately coming up with a way to move forward in their lives along with their grief and the love for their person, which is pretty much what society tells you not to do. You have to kind of leave that behind. And my goal is to scratch that. You can absolutely live a beautiful, meaningful life again along with your grief.
Yeah, wow. I love that, and how you're almost doing the opposite of what day to day society tells us to do. Can you talk a little bit about how you've arrived here where you are and doing this work?
Yes. And before I forget, I did want to preface everything I'm saying with saying that I do have so much compassion for the non-grieving community, because it's so far out for me to even remember when I when I didn't know what this was like. But I have
Mhm.
so much compassion because I myself had no idea how to support someone, or what I was saying, kind of the textbook things to this is what you say when you give condolences, and I had no
Mhm.
idea. So I feel that now that I
Mhm.
understand what it's really like, I still have so much compassion for those that don't get it, because I once didn't.
Yeah, that is. Thank you for saying that. Uh, I think that in a lot of our conversations becomes this barrier between, let's call it, the
Hmm.
two different communities, right?
Yes.
One has a hard time asking for help and saying what they need, and rightfully so. And the other has a hard time providing help because they don't know what help to give and they don't know what to say. And there's just this barrier in between the two. So I appreciate you saying that. And I'd love to talk about how we bridge that gap a little bit today.
Absolutely. And yes, going back to your question, what brought me here was, I mean, Justin, I lost my husband Tony a month before my 36th birthday. We were only married 2 years. We were planning for a family. We were so in love. Everything was amazing. And then he died. He was diagnosed with cancer and died exactly 25 days after. So there was so much shock, so much denial. The entire time he was sick, I was in this incredible denial. My mind, I know now, was just trying to protect me to actually even go through this massiveness. And I found myself very, very alone. As much as I had so much love and support from my friends and family, they were absolutely amazing, but I felt like an alien. You know, I was the only widow I knew. I joined my very first grief support group on Facebook 3 years in. So I went through like the absolute worst, most horrific, tender, painful, really raw years of my grief all on my own. So I was going through so many things that now I know it's so normal. It's completely okay to feel like that. It's all these things that are valid for me now. I kind of wish that I had much more support around that off the bat, and that's what really, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to create support groups for widows and those going through a partner loss and the grief community in general, because unless you go through something this colossal, you just don't get it. Like, how could you?
Sure, sure. It's an interesting parallel. I hear people say things like when they talk about their children as an example,
Mm,
like if you don't have children, you wouldn't understand. And the people that don't have children say things
that's
like,
right.
"Oh, I'm sure, right?" But really, until you get there, no
You
idea,
don't. That's
no
right.
idea. And the ability to walk in somebody's shoes
Mm.
just isn't possible until you go through that experience. I'm curious. You said, and this kind of comes back to the non-grieving and the grieving communities, but you said you felt like an alien, and you were the only widow that you knew. Um, how did you start to, you said the first support group was 3 years in. Where did you turn in those 3 years to feel less like an alien?
You know, I had so much support from really close friends and family. I would always
Mhm,
text them and call them and just kind of cry and vent. And
mhm,
it's, it's the natural thing to do is try to fix that. So I had
mhm,
very few friends that would just let me cry and let me be sad and let me be in my
mhm,
feelings without trying to fix. And Justin, I truly believe that this comes from a place of love. When
mhm,
they just, someone that loves you doesn't want to see you cry and doesn't want to see you hurt. But
mhm,
this is something that is just going to be with us
mhm,
forever. And I dealt with it on my own. I remember there were many, first of all, I didn't sleep for 19 months, like not 10 seconds. It turns out I saw a sleep specialist at that time, and they said your brain retrained itself to survive off of no sleep. So now you have to learn how to sleep again. So I had to teach my brain how to sleep. I had to process so much, and I did it all on my own. I just let myself feel my feelings, and I'm glad I had the self-awareness that I had at the time, which I said, I know this is going to be awful. No matter how much people tell me it's going to be fine, you're going to be okay, give it time. That's another big misconception and big myth in grief, that time is not what helps you. You help you, not the time. But I just got to a point where I realized, okay, this is going to be with me forever. I have to figure out a way that I'm going to get I'm going to get to the point where I can actually survive this and
mhm,
live my life with this. And I started reading books when I could. I couldn't read a sentence without forgetting what I just read before.
mhm,
I educated myself online. I looked for a support group. A friend said, you should join a support group on Facebook. And I Googled young widows and then joined a
mhm,
community. And instantly I felt, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. There was a
mhm,
26-year-old widow in there, way younger than I am. And
mhm,
it felt like the first safe place that me and my grief couldn't go to.
mhm. Wow, having that safe place, and you've got your family in these moments, and you've got some close friends. Yet through their support, they don't know what you're going through, but yet you find this group of women who have been through maybe not exactly, but they've been through a very similar life experience. And it sounds like, from reading between the lines a little bit, it sounds like that was a very relieving moment for you.
Absolutely. It was so
Do-
relieving because, like, the difference, I will speak specifically to
Mhm,
the partner loss. There's nothing grief doesn't touch. And when
mhm,
you're married, you make every decision with your partner. Everything in your life is based around each other.
mhm,
When it's a true partnership like I have with my husband, and everything down to even going to the supermarket was impossible for me
mhm,
because of all the memories, and everywhere I went, I
mhm,
felt the loss tremendously in everything
mhm,
that I did. And I couldn't really say that to my friends and family because they would say the same thing, just give it time. And it's like
mhm,
hearing all these platitudes, it just made me feel even less understood.
mhm,
So
mhm,
coming to the group and saying the things I was saying, and everyone, I feel the same way. Oh, this happened to me too. Oh, I did this when that happened and it helped. This, it was just so, so helpful
mhm,
to be in the
mhm,
same room with. It didn't necessarily make me feel better as far as the pain, but
mhm,
it provided comfort and I felt less alone.
mhm. Yeah. Wow. And you mentioned the platitudes. I mean, we've had a couple of friends join us on this podcast, and Daniel specifically and Nate both mentioned specific platitudes that that they might have even said prior to their loss, because they didn't know any different, and they didn't know how um, kind of the opposite effect of what the intent is, and they had to kind of see past it with certain people because they know that these people were trying to do their best and didn't know what to say.
Absolutely.
So when you talk about those communities, you talk about bridging the gap, how do people in the non-grieving community, how do they know how to avoid platitudes? How do they know what to say? How do they know what not to say? Have you experienced places to turn for that type of information that's been helpful?
Yes, like you just said, I myself said those platitudes. Like,
Hmm.
he's in a better place, she's in a better place. And being on the receiving end of condolences is a very different place to be than when you're giving them. And
Hmm.
now that's why, again, I have so much compassion because I also was saying all the wrong things.
Hmm.
And grief is not one size fits all. It's
Hmm.
very, very unique to each one of us. Maybe what's comforting for you to hear is not comforting to me. So I always say to my community, there's been so many people that reach out and say, how can I support my X, Y, and Z going through this and this loss? And
Hmm.
I tell them, you know the person, and you can say to them, I don't know how you feel. I
Hmm.
don't know how to best support you, but I'm here. What can I do? I'm just
Hmm.
a phone call away. I'll check in on you. No pressure to reply back, and really do check in.
Hmm.
Just ask them what is helpful to them and what isn't. And if they say, I
Hmm.
don't know, because so many times you yourself, as the griever, you don't even know what's helpful. You just
Hmm.
are dealing with so much that you don't even know what you want. But you can
Sure.
also say, when you do know, I'm here, and just
Hmm.
continue to check in on them and let us be sad. Let us
Hmm.
cry. Let us vent without
Hmm.
fight back that urge of trying to fix that. Oh, but this will get better. Oh, but just say,
Hmm.
I can imagine. I don't
Hmm.
understand how you feel because I haven't gone through it, but I can imagine how awful this is for you. And
Hmm.
you have every right to feel what you're feeling. And just like
Hmm.
let the person feel and let the person express themselves without changing anything. And here's the thing, there's a lot of work to be done on ourselves around grief and death itself, because I was so scared of death before
Hmm.
Tony died. I couldn't
Hmm.
even see a dead body on TV.
Hmm.
And when he died here in our living room, I threw myself on his body and hugged him and
Hmm.
kissed him. And
Hmm.
it's really working around, because our grief brings up the reality of our mortality to others,
Hmm.
and it puts it in their face like, oh my god, this can happen any second, and it scares you, and it's so uncomfortable, and it's easier to not talk about it or lean away from it. But the best thing to do is lean into that discomfort and at least put your discomfort on the side to be there for the person that you love and that is grieving and needs your support and your
Hmm.
love.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful stuff. Uh, it's part of, I think part of, um, you know, our hope is that these conversations can connect people who have been through certain experiences that are probably relatively similar in a lot of aspects, but also help connect their support groups and help connect people who are non-grieving, and to start changing that dynamic, because it is a difficult dynamic. And I know I have said the wrong thing so many times.
We all have.
There's one in particular from when I was like, I think it was in middle school. I think it was 8th grade or a freshman, that I'm not going to say haunts me, but I think about on a regular basis. And like, I wish I had that moment back to correct the thing that I said, especially hearing people talk about it like you and Nate and Daniel, and I, really appreciate what you're bringing to the world from that perspective. Can you talk a little bit about how your experience then started to morph into like, hey, I want to do this for more people, and I want to start a career in a business to help people do this?
Justin, believe it or not, I've always loved coaching. I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't know it. Like, I've always been the person that my friends and family call for advice,
Mm-hmm.
especially in relationships, because I mean, I had a beautiful relationship, and my friends always call me for advice in general. And I just always had a love for helping. That's just been I'm a big empath and I'm a big helper. And
Mm-hmm.
I always say to the grief community, I'm not helping you because you're unhelpless. I'm guiding you. But
Mm-hmm.
I started posting on social media just to express myself as what I was going through, and so that others felt less alone, and just to
Mm-hmm.
kind of be of support to others. And then it just started growing and growing, and so many people would count on my videos every day. And then I said, I did positive psychology. I got myself certified in positive psychology back
Mm-hmm.
in 2020. And my instructor said to me, "You love coaching. Why don't you get into grief coaching? Your community's growing. You're really good at this. You're helping so many others.
Mm-hmm.
You've survived something you thought you couldn't, and so many others wish they had what you didn't have. Why don't you look into grief coaching?" So I did, and I got certified. I went to through two different institutions and got certified. And I have absolutely fallen in love with this work
Mm-hmm.
because it's truly an honor to be well, it's through Zoom, but it's
Mm-hmm.
still to be connected with someone that's opening their heart to you. And there's nothing more vulnerable than sharing your pain,
Mm-hmm.
and this pain. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been unbelievably beautiful and helpful for me as well,
Mm-hmm.
in being there for others going through something that I know how awful it feels.
Totally. And so, um, this skill, it sounds like, I mean, you were living with this skill that you had in coaching, might not have been tapping into it in the way that you are now. But and I feel like this could like be a whole nother podcast about like how to identify
Mhm.
your skills for your career, right? Um, uh, but this instructor saw something. Can you talk a little bit about, your instructor highlights this moment of this skill, and you say, I'm going to turn this into something more than just sharing? Like, can you walk through how you arrived in that moment to decide like, hey, I'm going to go do this in a different way than I am today?
Yes, I did. Once she mentioned that, I looked into it, and I also said, before I do this, I
Mm-hmm.
have to not just talk the talk, I have to walk the walk. I had a lot
Mm-hmm.
of self work to do. That's what
Mm-hmm.
got me also into self love training. I became a coach for that, and I did so much work on myself, Justin. I did all my inner child work, all my shadow work. It's a daily, forever journey, but
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to authentically be in a place where I can actually offer support to someone and really be there for them, because my grief was so raw and so tender for so long that I needed to take care of my grief a little bit more first and get to a place
Mm-hmm.
mentally where I can take in everyone else's pain, because for
Mm-hmm.
me, that's been again, I'm a huge empath and huge energy feeler, and
Mm-hmm.
it can be a lot if you're not taking care of yourself as well and working through your own things. So I just did a lot of work on myself, and
Mm-hmm.
I did the certifications and started to just continue to post more consistently
Mm-hmm.
and show up even more
Mm-hmm.
online every day, and offered my first group um, this past winter, and it was absolutely amazing, the things that those women were saying, and the the things that they were able to express in that container that they wouldn't be able to say that anywhere else or be understood anywhere else. It was such
Mm-hmm.
a beautiful experience, and I said, I really really need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I need to
Yeah.
continue to do this. It was just such a beautiful experience, and it's so
Mm-hmm.
needed.
Mm-hmm.
It's really needed in our community.
Totally, totally. It's interesting what you said there about these women talking in this very specific space, and they wouldn't be able to do that elsewhere. Um, and I can make a lot of assumptions on what that means. But you also, in kind of our prep dialogue, mentioned something about a grief illiterate society,
Mhm.
and kind of how it gets in the way of healing. And I think this probably hits on the platitudes we talked about, but to those two things, the women in this special protected place and the society, you coined it as kind of the grief illiterate society, do those two things, I mean, is that why they wouldn't be able to do that elsewhere in your mind, or are there other things that were kind of getting in their way?
Yes, that's definitely a big one,
Mm-hmm.
because you go through this big loss. You, as the griever, I'll speak for myself. I went through this big loss. I had no idea how I was going to survive. You don't think, you don't bring it to the moment. You think long term. You're like, how am I going to spend the rest of my life like this? How am I going to, there's so much that goes through your mind, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, some people have to go right back to work. You get 3 days, 4 days, and then you have to go right back to work. That wasn't my case. I actually like blew my savings. I couldn't. My mental health was shot.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I couldn't read a sentence off a book. I couldn't focus on anything. I could barely eat. It was just awful, and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't go back to work. I couldn't function. Like literally, my cognitive function was impaired
Mm-hmm.
for so
Mm-hmm.
long, and I just took care of myself that way. But everyone kept trying to tell me always, and I would stop them. That's why I say kept trying, because I would stop them and say, stop telling me this is going to get better with time. It's been a year, I feel the same. It's been 2 years, I feel the same. I think what really changed it was focusing on, okay, what can I do to make this livable for me, because it isn't going anywhere. And if I'm going to be alive, and I know I have to be with this grief, and in the beginning you resisted, at least I did. I resisted it, and now I have such a beautiful relationship with my grief. It's almost as
Mm-hmm.
if like I've become one with it. But it takes time to process that, and to really, you have get to know yourself. What
Mm-hmm.
works for you, what doesn't work for you. When I think the platitudes again come from a place of love, but it also
Mm-hmm.
comes from a place of being scared as well,
Mm-hmm.
of what that means in the person's life. For example, I had someone tell me, literally say to me, I can't see you like this. I can't be around this. This is too much for me. This is
Mm-hmm.
making death too real. And in that case, that my job was to understand that and say, I
Mm-hmm.
understand that, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But we are a walking reminder of what inevitably will happen to everyone in one form of another. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it won't be a spouse, maybe, but the only sure thing is death.
Mm-hmm.
So we are just kind of a very big reminder of that.
Sure, sure. You said something that, I mean, I hadn't even really considered, uh, that you have a beautiful relationship with your grief. I think, and I don't think I've ever considered uh, having a relationship with a feeling. And in general, probably that's probably what feelings are to some degree. It's probably, way too smart to that it just, those thoughts probably just fly over my head. They probably won't land with me very well. But can you talk a little bit about um, the relationship, and not necessarily yours,
Mhm.
but how somebody can have a relationship with one of their feelings like grief.
The what I've seen and I've heard from so many women that I speak to is they find ways to stay connected with
Hmm.
their person. And a really good friend and mentor of mine, Marie, she's a grief coach as well, and she said something so beautiful that stuck with me forever. And she said, "You lose your person once, you don't have to lose them again. So
Mm.
you don't have to. They're gone physically, but this love that we feel for them is always going to be there.
Mm.
And the way to continue that relationship is, in my case, I've embodied the qualities of Tony that I love so much. The things about him I've loved, I've embodied them, and I carry him through me in that way.
Mm.
Other grievers have told me they write letters to their person, or they
Mm.
go to all the places they visited together, or they continue certain traditions or create traditions including them. It's all about finding ways to stay connected to the person because the love
Hmm.
will always be there. And
Hmm.
it's like they say, the grass is green on the other side. It's not. It's green where you water it.
Mm.
So
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Um, you mentioned something in kind of our prep about secondary losses, and what you just said there is that you don't, like, you've lost them once, you don't have to lose them twice. Is that what you mean by secondary loss, or is there something different that we should be aware of?
in secondary losses, it's literally so much. We mean our identity. We're no longer
Hmm.
someone's wife, no longer we're their widow now. We're no longer someone's
Gotcha.
caregiver. You lose your confidence, you lose your sense of security, sense of self. You literally lose people.
Hmm.
There are so many widows that their husband's family, they completely X them out once the person's, gone. Maybe a week or two, but past that time, there's no more check-ins, there's no more relationship. There's even friends that just are completely gone from your life through this loss. So you lose so much. And that's what we mean by secondary losses. Like the big
Yeah.
loss is the person, but
Sure.
you lose your routine, you lose your future together, you lose their future, you lose all the hopes and dreams and plans. Some people literally lose their home. They have to move, they lose their financial support. I mean, there are so many losses that happen within the
Hmm.
main big loss.
Yeah. Yeah. That's um, wow. Hadn't considered all of the self identity components, right? That have got to be super super tough. And now you almost start to develop a whole new identity as this seemingly new person, right?
100%.
Um, well, I will tell you, Katherine, through our conversation, I feel hope, and I feel hopeful, and I feel even on such a heavy topic, and especially um, uh, getting into some of the depths of your own grief journey. Thank you for sharing that. But feel hope. I feel lighter. I feel excited for people who encounter you. Um, you had a few. I asked at one point about kind of like tips that are helpful for people that you encounter, whether they're clients of yours or not. Are there anything, maybe one, two, three things that would be super helpful for folks that are watching or listening?
Yes. The first thing I'll say is slow down. The
Mm-hmm.
world will try to rush you. It's time for this. It's time for that. Maybe you should this. Maybe you should that. Quiet it all out and just slow down and ask yourself often, what do I need in this moment? And if you don't, excuse me, if you don't know what you need in that moment, you most certainly will know what you don't need. So if something's happening that isn't working, say no when you want to say no. Don't feel forced to rush and not process, because that's what happens to many grievers. They can't even process what's happening because they have to hurry up and move on. They feel
Mm-hmm.
that they're left behind. They feel that they're doing something wrong. So slow down and take your time to process. Also join a grief community. There's so many groups on Facebook, on Instagram, um, it is going to be so beneficial to be surrounded, like I said earlier, by those who really truly get what you're going through and can support you, and you can feel safe for your grief to be seen and heard and witnessed. It's so important. And please remember that your grief is valid. I don't need to validate that for you. No one needs to validate that for you. Your person died. That's valid enough. That is, just know that you need your grief witnessed and held and supported, but it is already valid. You don't need
Mhm.
validation from anyone.
Yeah.
And don't forget to take care of yourself. I know self-care is very difficult in grief because the
Mhm.
last thing we're thinking about is that, but
Mhm.
keep it to the basics. Stay hydrated, sleep when you can, slow down and rest. If what you need is movement, go out for a walk, go out for a run. Just focus on baby steps, and also don't think so much of, like I did, how am I going to get through a whole life? Just how can I get through this next hour,
Mhm.
this next moment? How can I get through this day? And so on and so forth.
That's great stuff. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
Um,
welcome.
Katherine, where can people find you? We'll put some links in here, but where can people find you that are itching to get a hold of you?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram or TikTok under the same name, Grief Embraced with Love.
Awesome. Katherine Brito, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for sharing your journey and how it led you to what you do for so many others. And thank you for being part of the bereaved community as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to meet you and have this
Yeah.
beautiful conversation with you.
Great. Thanks, Katherine.
You're welcome.